As the sun peeked over the Montana mountains, painting the wilderness in a soft, golden hue, a tale of unwavering loyalty and unexpected heroism was about to unfold. In a rustic cabin nestled at the edge of a pine forest lived Jonathan Whitaker, a solitary forest ranger whose life had long been defined by isolation. Years earlier, on a frigid winter morning, he had stumbled upon a starving golden retriever puppy abandoned in a roadside ditch. The tiny creature, with its ribs protruding and eyes wide with fear, had trembled as Jonathan gently wrapped it in his coat, whispering, "You're safe now." He named the pup Maxwell, or Max for short, and from that moment on, the two became inseparable companions.
Ow.
Their bond transcended the typical relationship between man and dog. It was a connection forged from shared loneliness and mutual rescue, a profound understanding born from the need to belong. Jonathan's quiet life revolved around tending to the forests, patrolling trails, and keeping watch over the wildlife that roamed the ridges and valleys. Max was his constant shadow, matching him step for step. Together they waded through streams, hiked beneath towering cedars, and sat in companionable silence by the cabin's fireplace as night fell. Jonathan had endured significant losses in his past family, friends, and even his sense of purpose. But Max had filled a void that no human companionship could. He found solace in the dog's unwavering loyalty, in the way those soulful eyes followed him, as if no distance could ever truly separate them. One crisp autumn morning, Jonathan set out to inspect the game trails winding near the cliffs. The air was sharp and fragrant with pine and frost. Max trotted ahead, his golden coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight, nose close to the ground in curiosity. Jonathan crouched to examine a muddy hoofprint when the forest betrayed him. A deafening crack echoed from above. He looked up just in time to see a massive rotting pine log break free from the cliff face. Before he could react, it crashed down with crushing force, pinning his thigh against the unforgiving earth. Pain seared through him like wildfire. He clawed desperately at the heavy wood, but it refused to budge. His leg was trapped, blood seeping through his pants. In the chaos, his radio had been knocked from his belt, skittering across the rocks and shattering against a nearby boulder. He was alone, injured, and bleeding. Max barked frantically, scratching at the trunk and whining in desperation. Jonathan reached out with a trembling hand, brushing the dog's soft ear. "Go, Max. Find someone. Go." At first, the loyal retriever froze, torn between his instinct to stay and the command to leave. Jonathan's voice broke again, desperate and pained. "Please, boy, find help." With a final whimper, Max turned and bolted into the trees. The golden retriever ran as if his master's life hung in the balance, which it did. He tore through underbrush, leapt over fallen logs, and finally burst from the forest cover onto the narrow highway that cut through the wilderness. At that precise moment, Officer Emily Carter was driving her patrol cruiser along the winding road. She slammed on the brakes as Max darted in front of her car, skidding to a stop with something clenched in his jaws. She stepped out, cautious but intrigued. The dog dropped the broken remains of Jonathan's radio at her boots, its jagged edges smeared with blood. Max barked sharply, spun toward the trees, then looked back at her, his eyes pleading. Emily crouched down. "Where is he? Show me." Max barked again, bounding a few steps into the forest, then back toward her. The message couldn't have been clearer. She grabbed her own radio. "Dispatch. I've got a possible injured person in the northern sector, following a canine lead. Request immediate medical response." Then she chased after Max, who led the way with urgent cries, weaving through the undergrowth as if every second was precious. They crested a rise, and the sound of a faint groan reached her ears. Behind a moss-covered boulder lay Jonathan Whitaker, his face ashen, his legs still pinned beneath the fallen trunk. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, checking his pulse. "He's alive!" she shouted as backup officers arrived on the scene. Max whimpered and pressed against Jonathan's shoulder, licking his face, refusing to move away. The officers jammed crowbars beneath the log, muscles straining as they attempted to lift the massive weight. The rotten wood creaked, splinters snapping as they leaned with all their strength. Slowly, agonizingly, the trunk began to rise. Jonathan gasped as the crushing pressure eased. Meanwhile, Emily tore open her medical kit. She wrapped a wide bandage high around Jonathan's thigh, twisting it into a tourniquet to slow the bleeding. "Stay with me, Jonathan. Don't let go," she urged. The officers gave a final heave and rolled the log just far enough to free his leg. Jonathan cried out in agony, then collapsed back against the earth, trembling, blood still seeping through the bandage but no longer trapped. From the distance came the wail of ambulance sirens, cutting through the trees like a beacon of hope. They carried him out on a stretcher, Max trotting beside them, never once breaking his gaze from his master. At the ambulance, the loyal golden retriever leapt inside, curling against Jonathan's side, as if daring anyone to separate them. On the ride into town, Jonathan's hand rested weakly in Max's fur. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved me." Surgery saved Jonathan's leg. Days later, he woke in a hospital bed, afternoon sunlight slanting through the blinds. At his feet lay Max, eyes heavy but alert, tail thumping faintly at the sight of him awake. Jonathan lifted a hand and Max bounded onto the bed, trembling as he nestled against his chest. Relief shone in the dog's eyes, though he had never once left his master's side. From the doorway, Emily smiled softly. "He stayed here the whole time," she said. Jonathan stroked Max's golden fur, feeling the small, steady heartbeat beneath. "He's more than a dog," Jonathan murmured. "He's my family." As the days passed and Jonathan slowly healed, he often reflected on that harrowing moment in the forest, the crushing weight, the helplessness, the choice to trust his companion. He realized the wilderness had nearly claimed his life, but the little soul he had once rescued from a ditch had returned the favor. Max's courage reminded him that even the smallest lives can carry the greatest strength. In loyalty, in love, there lies a power stronger than fear, stronger even than death itself. When Jonathan was finally discharged weeks later, he returned to his cabin at the forest's edge. The pines whispered overhead, the streams trickled as before, but something inside him had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a man alone in the wilderness. He was a man who had been carried back to life by a bond that nothing could break. Sometimes, Jonathan reflected as Max curled by the fire, his golden coat glowing in the firelight. Salvation comes not from great heroes or grand miracles, but from the smallest companions who never abandon us. And that, he thought, was the truest miracle of all.